All right, let's go ahead and get started. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So I heard a very nice sermon and while I was driving, and so I decided to... Mike's just going to go to sleep. And so I decided to kind of transcribe part of the sermon and talk to you guys about it in sort of in more modern language, I suppose. And the question is very interesting because it's something we get a lot in our world, which is, why am I a Christian? Why am I a Christian? And, in other countries are very homogeneous places, right? So, you go to whatever, Egypt, whatever, any country, and everyone's the same. Right? And so it's very easy for all of us to get along because we have very established social norms that everyone follows for whatever reason. In Egypt, you're a Christian because you're certainly not going to be a Muslim, right? That's the answer. What do you want me to be, a Muslim? Right? And then they're like, oh yeah, okay. And that's the end of that discussion. No one at school asks you why you're a Christian. No one challenges you. Right? Because no, there are options. The other option is there's us and them. And then the Muslims have the same thing. Us and them. Right? It's us versus them. We've been fighting for centuries. They kill us. We kill them. That's just the way, it's all meant to be. But here, it's a question we get. Right? And I'm sure some of you have been asked that. Like by friends at school. Why are you a Christian? Why do you believe what you believe? Right? And I think the worst answer you can give, or a very unsatisfying answer, is, well, I was born into it. This is how I was raised. This is what my parents are. This is what my grandparents were. Right? Because that's just an unfulfilling answer. And maybe when it was young, you can say, that works, and you can say, well, these are my circumstances, and I was born this way into this house. But at some point in life, I hope that you grow up and then you say, yeah, I was born like this, and my parents made me go to church for 10, 15 years. Okay, but at some point in life, I'm going to reaffirm this for myself, right? You have to choose this for myself, right? And that's actually similar. This is a very, very similar concept to what we even think about in baptism, right? Like I told you before, baptism was something we did to adults. And then we decided to make it for young kids so that they can partake of the mysteries. But at some point, you all have to say, okay, that baptism thing that my parents made me do or did to me, I want to accept that as my own. And you have to consciously do that as an adult. And nobody can do that for you. No one can force it, right? In fact, St. John Chrysostom has this great quote where he says, as Christians, we can't force anyone to do anything, right? So I would hope that at some point we get convinced ourselves. And not just so that I can convince others, but just for myself, just to sit down and say, look, am I going to do this or not? Right? And I can actually remember a time when I was young when I said to myself, either I'm going to do this right or I'm not going to do this at all. I'm not going to do this half-heartedly. Right? Either I'm in this or I'm not in this. And if I'm not in this, I'm not in this. And that's just kind of like my personality. And I came to a moment in my life where I said, am I going to do this or not? And I made that decision. And I think it's something we all have to do. So here's a few thoughts that come to mind as to why I'm a Christian. And maybe this can be something that I can contemplate on myself, or something when someone asks me, or when I'm pressed, or someday when your child says, why are you a Christian, Dad or Mom? You have, something of an answer. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's a list that seems reasonable to me. And it's kind of a little far-fetched, so I just want you to, to bear with me. The first reason I think I'm a Christian is I think I have the best God. I have the most comprehensive God. The most convincing and thoughtful God. So if I compare the depiction of God across religions, right? And I say, tell me about the Muslim God and the Hindu God and the Buddhist God and the agnostic God and the whatever else God that's out there. And I compare the way that God perceives me and the way I perceive that God. And you just wrote down lists of characteristics and said, all right, just pick the one you like. Honestly, I feel like I'd have the best God on that list. And I'd have the most convincing God on that list. Why? Because I believe I would pick my God based on a few of his characteristics that would be on that list that I would really like to see. So the first one is, we have a God that is all love. A God that the gospel says is love, right? Not just loving. And there is no other religion that says God is love. So I have a God that is with me and not against me. I have a God that is on my side. A God that isn't sitting there waiting for me to fall, waiting for me to mess up, so that this God can condemn me and say, you didn't live your life according to the principles laid out. Now it's time for me to get you, right? But a God that will help me succeed. In fact, a God that when I don't succeed will help carry me to success, right? And I don't want a God that wants me to worship him. And a God that I'm afraid of, right? Or afraid of the punishment of. I don't want a God with a stick, right? A God with a stick is, if you just wrote down the list, that wouldn't be a characteristic I would look for. And if that's the case, then I say let's avoid that God. Right? Which, by the way, is what many atheists do. When you talk to atheists, you find that it's not that they're really atheists. They really aren't. They hate God. And they'll acknowledge his existence, but they hate him because he is a judgeful, vengeful God that is waiting for them to mess up. And that's why they deny his existence. Right? And so I want you to imagine for a moment, sometimes this depiction that we have of God that I don't think is a proper one, right? Imagine for a moment if I stood there, and I actually said this to someone just a few weeks ago. If I stood there and I just held a knife over your head, right? So imagine for a moment we're talking. I take out a huge, 9-inch blade, and I hold it over you like this, right? And I say, if you don't listen to what I say, I'm going to stab you. Okay? So, first question, are you going to obey me? Yeah, you're going to obey me. I have a knife, right? And it gets better. I'm not just going to stab you. I'm going to keep stabbing you into eternity, forever. I'm just going to keep stabbing you for 1,000,000 years. And then you're like, okay, I'm really going to obey you now, right? I'm going to listen to what this guy has to say. And now imagine I say, now I want you to love me. Does that work? Are you ever going to love me? Does it make any sense? You can't love me, right? The best thing you can do is you can pretend to love me, but then really who are you loving? Yourself, right? I love myself. I don't feel like getting stabbed into eternity, so I'm going to do whatever it is the guy with the knife says, right? It's kind of like, when you're in one of these situations, do whatever the guy with the gun says, right? Just generally good advice, right? So if God's holding a knife over us and he says, now love me, you're like, I don't think I'm going to love you. I'll obey you. I'll do all the things you want me to do. I'll hold the line. I'll try not to sin. And if I do, I'll quickly confess because I don't feel like getting stabbed. But that isn't love, right? And so that kind of God, right, that's a very Islamic God, right? The God that punishes, the God that attacks, both on earth and in eternity, right? So my God doesn't wait for me to worship him. He doesn't wait for me to bow down to him. In fact, he's waiting to give me. My God is waiting to give me so that my cup runneth over. And I love this expression. Can you think about that expression? Can you imagine if someone said, hey, could you pour me, whatever. You're at some wine tasting. You guys are underage. Those of you are overage. You're at some wine tasting, and then you hold a glass of wine, and then there's this $500 bottle of wine. And you say, could you pour me some? And then, I don't know if you guys know, but when you go to a restaurant and they pour and they give you a lot of the glass, it's called a generous pour. And you say, thank you for the generous pour. Okay, this is the etiquette of wine. This is what you're going to do when you become a snob, okay? But then this person stands there and just keeps pouring. And then the whole glass fills. And then the glass just kind of keeps spilling. And he just pours like this. Can you imagine the sight? And there's just wine, a very expensive wine falling. And this is what I think of when I think of the way God gives. In Arabic, we have an expression. We say, biyadi b'sakhat. Does anyone know in Arabic enough to know what I said? Sakhat means massive generosity, craziness, right? When someone says, hey, can I borrow $5 because I want to get a Subway sandwich? You go, here's 100, keep the change. Kind of like that. So we have a God that isn't against us, but it's for us. He doesn't want to take from us. He wants to give, right? In fact, we even say this in the Gregorian liturgy, right? I know it's always late at night and everyone wants to eat meat, right? But at one point during the Gregorian liturgy, Abuna says, you have no need of my service, but I have need of your lordship, right? He doesn't need our service. God doesn't need anything from us, right? And every time we think he needs something, it's just kind of like a joke, right? He's just pretending. Kind of when he says, hey, can someone roll the stone away so I can raise Lazarus from the dead? So, right? If you're going to raise someone from the dead, you can probably just do your hand like that and then the stone will roll away. Now, what if the story said, and he waved his hand and the stone rolled away, and then he raised Lazarus? You'd be like, okay. I mean, he stood in front of seas of ocean and clouds and he just said stop, and then the ocean stopped. So if he said to the stone roll away and the stone moved, we'd be like, all right, no problem. Did he need the 5 loaves and the 2 fish? No. Did he need Samson to not cut his hair so he can give him superhuman strength? No. So why is he asking him to do this stuff? He just wants us to participate. You're a little child, you got some fish, got some bread, here, you give me, and then I'll give you. You give me and I'll give you. Right? It's kind of like when you hold a child's hand when they're learning how to draw, and then you draw for them, and then you say, look what you did, it's beautiful. Right? And the kid thinks what? I did this. Right? Same thing. You could just say, give me the paper, let me do it. It's not fun. It's not nice. Kid doesn't feel good after that. Right? But you hold his hand, you go, oh, look at you, wow, you're doing so well. Okay? So this is what God does for us. And this is the kind of God we have. And so this God isn't waiting for me to love him. In fact, this is the God that loves me even when I deny him, when I hate him, when I spit on him, when I turn my back on him, when I ignore him, when I purposefully disobey him. Right? Imagine the story of the prodigal son and that dad. After all those things, the son comes back and the dad throws his arms around him. And he kisses him. Where does he kiss him? On his neck. Why? Why the neck? Has it ever been like a day like today, you go walking around campus or school or wherever you're walking and you start getting hot, you start getting sweaty, and you get really hot, you get really sweaty, and you're sweating a lot. Where do you sweat? On your neck, right? And then when someone hugs you or touches you and then they touch your neck and your neck's sweaty, you're like, no, don't touch my neck, it's gross, right? The neck is the worst part. It's the stinkiest part, right? When you're walking on a long trip. So he went and he kissed the worst part. You imagine if I'm all sweaty and I'm like, no, don't touch me, and you're like, and someone grabs me and kisses my neck, even though it's sweaty. What is that? That's crazy love. So the second characteristic of God, so this is the first characteristic that this is why I would pick this God. If I had a list of gods, I'd pick this one. The second one is he's all-powerful. And there's nothing he can't do. And by the way, we use this word in the liturgy. We say, what? Pantokrator. And for some reason, of all the words, we translate all the words, but we leave that one. Why don't we just translate it? Has anyone ever seen the translation? What's the translation? Yeah, in the old books it says Almighty. That's when we still translated it. We stopped translating it. We just left it Pantokrator. Just like we leave it, just like we say Theotokos. And we don't translate that either. Why? We leave it in the Greek. Because what does Pantokrator mean? It means a lot of things. What does pan mean? All. And then Tokrator means what? Controlling, right? It comes from democracy. Demo means people. Ocracy means control of the people. Theocracy means control of God, right? So ocracy is governing, controlling. So Pantokrator means all controlling, all governing, all ruling. Everything is in his hand. And that's why the icon of the Pantokrator is him holding what? Earth. Right? So we have a God that is almighty, all-powerful, all-able. And this is something I would like in a God. Someone who can save me and help me when needed. And then the third characteristic, and this is the one I'm going to focus on a little bit, is that my God is very wise. In fact, we say he is wisdom. He is Sophia. And if I want to worship a God, and if I had to pick a God, I'd want a God that loves me. I'd want a God that's all-powerful, but I would need that God to be wisdom. Why? Because what if you have a friend that loves you and is powerful, but stupid? Okay? A friend that's all just very well connected, very powerful, is crazy about you, but just not very wise, not prudent, has no discernment. Would you go to them with a problem? Like if you showed up and you say, hey, you know what, I've got this problem. I know you're connected to, a lot of people. And then guy gets on the mic and says, hey, Mark's got a problem. He apparently has done some drugs and now he's arrested. Hey, can we have any help here? And you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Right? So there's no wisdom. So I want a God who's wise enough. He loves me. He's powerful, and he can help me in a way that what? I may not be able to understand. In a way that's wiser than my wisdom. Right? Because when someone comes up to me and says, a little kid comes up to me and says, I don't know, I can't pass this exam, help me cheat. I might be able to help you cheat. I probably know more ways to cheat than you do, that's for sure. I've practiced. Okay? However, that's not very wise. That's maybe not the best thing for you. And so a wise parent may say, a friend, his age, may go, yeah, let me show you how to cheat. A parent or someone older with more experience, someone like you, may say, you know what? Let me teach you how to study. Let me tell you why cheating isn't a good idea. Let me tell you why cheating is going to bite you in the butt later. Right? So I want a God who's going to help me in a way that even if I don't understand it, I'm going to respect it. Right? And that's hopefully the point we get to with some of our parents, right? When they do things, you may not understand it, you may not agree with it, but you're like, you've been right before, so I'm going to let you have this one. Right? And that, as a parent, I can tell you that's all I hope for. That someday your kid says, you know what, I don't agree with you, I don't see where you're going with this, but you've been right a couple of times now, so I'm going to let it fly. So this God, I want a God that's going to do the best thing for me in the best time and in the best way, in a way that I may not even comprehend. I always imagine this, and I don't like to tell personal stories, but when I moved to Seattle the first time, I look back at that move and I think to myself, if I was God and you said, do whatever you think is best, I would not have come up with that scenario. I couldn't have conceived it. All right? And there are so many times in my life now that I look back at very large events in my life, some of them very hard, some of them very traumatic, and I think to myself, if I was God, I couldn't have come up with a better. If I said, here's all the power on earth, you could do anything you want, I wouldn't have thought of that scenario. But that was the best scenario. And it fixed a lot of things in a lot of ways that could not have been fixed any other way. And then you see God's wisdom, and you're like, dang, bro, you know what you're doing, right? You fixed this in a way that I could not have possibly thought of, right? So I want a God that will love me and do what's best for me regardless of my reaction, because my reaction is not always going to be positive, right? It's kind of like when you tell the kid, go study, and they throw a fit, right? Or you say, eat vegetables, they're like, no, I want candy. And then you see the 3-year-old in the grocery stores. Anyone ever seen this one? The one on the ground, throwing a fit on the ground, right? That's always pleasant. And there's two kinds of moms. There's one mom, sees him on the ground, screaming, throwing a fit, takes her shopping cart, just walks away. That is the right kind of mom. And then there's the one, Habibi, get up. You have to stop. Don't do this. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing me. And giving him all kinds of attention. And he knows he's got her in the palm of his hand. And he's going to keep going. So FYI, walk away. And then when they look around, they're like, I'm lost in a grocery store. I'm 3 years old. They'll come back. They'll come running. And they'll say, why'd you leave? They'll say, oh, don't leave me. All right. So I'm confident that my God gets it when I don't. I'm confident my God will do it when I don't think he will do the right thing, when I don't see what the wisdom in what he's doing is, right? Especially in this, we get this all the time, right? A disease happens, or a problem happens, or an accident happens, or a situation happens in a family. Something difficult challenges a family, and the family's like, why is God letting this happen, right? And oftentimes we have no answer. Right? And unfortunately, sometimes people come up with an answer. And they come up to you and they want to comfort you. And they're like, why does this person have cancer? Why did this thing happen to my family? Or why is this person whatever? And you're like, let me tell you why God's doing this. And you just want to say, just shut up and get out of my house. I didn't invite you here to tell me what God's thinking. I don't think you know. It would be my answer. Why don't you come here, hold my hand, and say, I'm here with you and I love you. That's really all I need you to do. Right? Unfortunately, people love to do what? Give answers. So I'm a Christian because my God has these characteristics. And if I was to pick all the religions, and this is outside of the concept of what's absolute truth and what's really there and all these other things, but you just listed all the religions and the characteristics of the God. This is why I would pick my God. This is why I would pick to be a Christian. And so some of the other religions depict God in a very vengeful way, judgmental way, aggressive way, one that gets you back for sinning, one that punishes you. And I don't want that. I would rather have a God who is tender and merciful towards me. I want a God who, like Christ said, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Because there is going to be a time when I'm evil, and there's going to be a time when I'm unrighteous. And I would want a God who sends his rain and his sun on those people, because I will be those people. In fact, I am those people. And also, my God is the only one that came down to my level so that I can understand him. Many other religions talk about a God who is very much detached from men, a God who's in heaven. But my God went out of his way, we say condescended, divested, whatever word you want to use, and came down to my level. Whenever you're talking to a child and you want to teach a child something, and the child's down here and you're way up there, what's the first thing you do? This actually has psychological bases, educational bases. If you ever want to teach a child something, what do?
You get on their level.
You get on their level. You take a knee and you go right down to their face and you talk to them. And that actually makes a huge difference in the child's ability to learn versus standing above them and looking. And so we have a God that chose that. Said, I'm going to come down and I'm going to speak to them the way they understand, even to the point of using parables about seeds and farms and soil and dirt, real stupid things. And I'm going to tell you about heaven by telling you about dirt and rocks and thorns and water and rivers and things like that. Right? So this God chose this path. And so the other times, in other religions, the God is so high and mighty. We talk about him philosophically. We talk about him when we argue. We talk about theory. We talk about the God that's never been seen. And we'll philosophize, right? We'll say, well, a good God would do this, but a bad God would do that, and it must be the case. And this is what Socrates and Plato and all these guys did, right? Is they argued in theory. And maybe that's good for some people. Some people like that stuff. Okay. But for the rest of us, I want a God I can look at, a God that's tangible, a God that's at my level. And not only is he at my level, he's beneath my level. He comes as what? A homeless guy. Foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head. He wandered from place to place. It's a ragtag group of disciples, apostles who, forgive me, a bunch of losers, right? Each one rescued from their own pretty pathetic life. And so even the apostles that he chose weren't like scholars and Pharisees and the big guys or theologians who went to seminary and know all the stuff. Just a bunch of guys. And he's just a guy. And he's dressed not very nicely. Right? So he even comes at a low level. So that I'm what? Above him. And then just in case I forget that I'm above him, he washes my feet. Just to remind you that you're really above me. I'm down here. And so, by him not coming as a king, as an emperor, as a dictator, as someone in power, right? Which is the way the Jews expected him to come. They said, what? Hosanna to the son of David, right? And David was the best of all the kings of Israel. They expected him on chariots and gold thrones and all kinds of things. He came in none of those things, right? But in fact, he came in the opposite. He came broken and he came struggling. And he came as one that's persecuted, unjustly persecuted, one who was beat, one who was incorrectly judged. And because there are many times in my life that I will feel persecuted and incorrectly judged and unjustly attacked. And I want a God who can relate to me. I don't want a God that created the world and said, now deal. Live in the world. Suck it up, buttercup. I want a God that when I say, look, I feel unjustly accused by my friends, by my family, by my whatever, that can look back at me and say, yeah, I was unjustly accused too. I was persecuted too. I was attacked too. I was beaten too. I was killed too. I can relate. And you say, I'm tempted by Satan and I can't stop. And like, I was tempted too. I was hungry too. So this God comes down and he lives through all of it. He deals with all of it. And plus, this is really the only solution that makes sense. One that's logical. One that's thoughtful. It's a God that I can see. A God that I could touch. A God that the history books wrote about. A God that we have confirmed actually existed. That we all know was there. Not some theoretical characteristics that we talk about in philosophy class. St. John in his epistle, he makes this point, and I know it's obvious to St. John and obvious, but it's very important to think about. He says, that which was from the beginning, All right, so that was which from the beginning, which means what? He's what? Eternal. Which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, that this we proclaim concerning the word of life. So St. John in his epistle starts it by saying, we talked to this guy. We touched this guy. We held this guy's hand. We heard him with our own ears. We're not talking about theory, guys. We're not talking about something that's philosophy, that we debate with scholars. And Christ even said that he who has seen me has seen the Father, right? I have come to reveal the Father to you. And so if I was to pick a God, and you say, why would you pick the Christian God? If I was picking and I got to pick, I'd pick one that I could see and touch and hear and listen to, and one who can appreciate me, one who gets me, one who's been through what I've been through, one who's not better than me, who condescended down to my level, one who gets all of the things I'm going through and struggling with. I want to live with a God that I can relate to and be a part of. Okay. And this becomes, I think, very important in our prayer life, right? Because we have a God that is good, a God that is loving, a God that is powerful, a God that is condescended from his level to ours, and a God who understands. And when I tell God I'm hurt, he understands, and when I'm sad, he gets it. And all of the aspects of life that come at us, we have a God who's experienced all of these things. Okay, so that's the characteristics of God. So if I was picking gods among all the different religions, this is why I would pick Christianity, right? Without it being imposed on me, without the answer of, well, that's why I was born, and that's what my parents told me to do, and that's what my grandparents are like, and this is what my village does in Egypt, so this is what we do. This is why I pick Christianity. The second reason I pick Christianity is not just because it presents the best God, but it presents the best man. It presents the best human that's possible. It's the highest concept of humanity. It puts man in the best possible light, and it actualizes man to reach his truest and highest potential as a human being. So, don't get me wrong, good behavior, good characteristics, these are found everywhere. Everywhere you look, there are people who give to charity and who help out the poor and who do good, noble acts for other people, okay? And sometimes amazing kindness. But how does it end? It leads to good behavior. It leads to you're a good person. You're a pillar in the community. You're an amazing citizen of the United States. You're a hero on the battlefield, right? These are the characteristics of morality. But where does Christianity lead? Is it just those things? So in Christianity, the goal turns out it isn't just to be a good human. It's to be a little God. It turns out that I'm supposed to be the image and likeness of the Creator. So God becomes all loving, I become all loving. God becomes all powerful, I become powerful. Did Christ say, you will do these things and more? Honestly, sometimes you look at the life of Pope Kyrillos and you count the number of miracles Jesus did, and I think Pope Kyrillos did more. And it reminds me of that verse, you will do these things and you will do more. And I want a God that's all wise, and when he becomes wisdom, I become in his image and I become wisdom. What comes out of my mouth isn't foolishness and silliness, it's wisdom. And no one is offering this. We are offered to become social people, social animals even, part of a community, citizens, whatever the case may be. But no one is saying, become a mini God. become a partaker, as St. Peter says in his epistle, of divine nature. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, they use this word theosis, right? This divinization of man. God, as St. Athanasius says, God became man so that man could become God. And we even say this in the Thursday Theotokeia. Who remembers the refrain of the Thursday Theotokeia? He took what is ours and gave us what is his. Look at the deal. Look at the swap. Who wins and who loses? It's clear God loses here. He comes, he takes the form, as Isaiah says, of the suffering servant. And he takes us and he moves us up into the image and likeness of God. And so this is really something else. This isn't that some animal that's developed the language, the power of language and the ability to have speech because we've evolved over time. This is me taking on the image of my Creator. So my goodness isn't even my goodness. It's the goodness of the God that's in me. And this is why he kept calling himself Son of Man. Christ kept using this expression so that as a human, I can find him. You're not just the Son of God, you're the Son of Man. You're with me. You're among me. I'll even take it a step further in the Eucharist. What do we say? You are in me, and I in you, the Son of Man. So he's clearly losing in this venture. And this is absolutely amazing. And that humility is mind-blowing. And so when I take on the characteristic of humility, I don't do it because people will say, oh, look how humble this person is. No, I become humble because I'm taking the image of the humble one, of the most humble person that ever existed. And so there's so many people that use evolution and science to say we're just evolved monkeys. And that's not to say there's something wrong with evolution. Evolution is one of the most highly tested and documented theories around. The problem is when I take evolution and I weaponize it, right? The problem in your school isn't that Darwin observed that some of these finches have beaks like this, and the finches that don't have the beaks that get the bugs die. And so the finches with the beaks that get the bugs live. Duh. That's called natural selection. That happens, right? There's the moth. That's the wrong color. The birds see the moth and they eat those moths. The moth that blends in with the tree, you can't see that moth, so that moth reproduces, and now there's more of those moths. Duh, right? That's not against God in any way. The problem is now I'm going to take evolution as a theory and I'm going to weaponize it. I'm going to say, aha, no God. And you're like, wait a minute. You went from the beak that eats the bugs, you know, that those birds live, and the beaks that can't eat bugs die, and you just went from that to no God, right? And so there's a lot of people that are taking science and weaponizing it. And in the process, what they're offering us is as people that you're just dust. You have nothing in you. Your role in life is you're going to eat, you're going to poop, you're going to mate, and then you're going to die. And that's it. And you're just dust. And there's really no other purpose. There's nothing else. And this is what's being offered, right? This is what's in the marketplace. This is what's being taught at our schools. And so I pick Christianity because if I have to pick, I don't pick that. I pick a God with the characteristics I talked about, and I pick the God that Christianity because it takes the human and it elevates him, because God condescended to that level. Okay, I'll end with this quote from Saint Theophan. He says, "Remind yourself of his love. He has created you out of nothing in his own likeness and image. He fights your battles by his divine grace. It is inconceivable how the great Lord of hosts could grant such favors to our nothingness and our worthlessness. And when we start to contemplate God and what he has given us, it's really mind-boggling. That's all I have. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments? Sure. The quote is, "Remind yourself of his love. He has created you out of nothing in his own likeness and image. He fights your battles by his divine grace. It is inconceivable how the great Lord of hosts could grant such favors to our nothingness and our worthlessness." By Saint Theophan. Yeah, Anna.
Okay, so aside from how loving God is and everything you said, and how we're expected to love him too, and not just fear him, at the end of the day, we are going to go to hell if we don't abide by what God asks us to do. And then, for the example, let's say when people say how you should respect your parents and that you're going to have consequences for whatever you do, regardless of the fact that you love them, they're still never going to throw you in fire as a consequence of what you did. But that's exactly what God is going to do.
So this is a good question. So Anna's question is, regardless of what I just said, I mean, yeah, whatever. But you're still going to go to hell if you live a bad life and all these things. And I think this is actually a topic we should talk about at and I actually have a talk prepared about this with a lot of quotes of fathers and stuff like that I think is good. But I think sometimes the way we conceive hell, because of the way it's presented, may or may not be the reality. And when I say may or may not be, I'm almost going to go with 100% not be. Right? So there are many fathers that talk about this river of fire that's in the book of Revelation, right? And they say how the river of fire, that's sulfur, that burns, and all of these things, what is this river of fire? What is hell? And I think we have to kind of think about that a little bit more, right? Because sometimes we say things like, well, hell is a place where God isn't, right? But of course, God is everywhere. So he's in hell, right? He can't not be in hell. And God is love. So God is in hell, and he's love in hell. So I'm in hell, God's right here, and he's love. And how does that work? So then when I think about what does it mean to be burned, and what kind of punishment is that? And I think this is a whole big topic, and there's lots to say here. And maybe we can talk about that next week. Actually, maybe we should just talk about that. But there's several different fathers that talk about what hell could be. Because I think this idea that hell is just a bunch of fire and there's guys with pitchforks and they're poking us. Because if you think about that, that means that Satan is kind of like a subcontractor to God, right? So like you have these people, they don't do good things. So you say, all right, you were bad, so I'm going to send you and I'm going to send you to the devil. And the devil says, all right, I'm working for God now, minimum wage at least, right? And I'm a subcontractor. So you send me the bad people, I'll take care of them. God says, all right, you take care of them. You're working for me, right? And so now they're kind of working together, which doesn't make much sense, right? So the best expression, the best quote I ever heard, and this has always stuck with me, and maybe we'll talk about this more next week. Hopefully you come. Is that Saint Isaac the Syrian talks about hell, and he says, when you look at the story of the prodigal son, you look at the older brother. Okay? And he says, you look at the older brother, where was the older brother living? Where was he living? In his father's house, right? He lived in his father's house the whole time. He never left his father's house. And did his father love him? Yes. Did he have servants in his father's house? Yes. But he didn't love his father. So his father was there, His father was love, and he didn't love his father. In fact, when his father showed acts of kindness to the brother, what did it make the older son do? It made him get angry. Are there people in the world who, when they see something good happen to someone else, get angry? Are there? They're already in hell. Right? And so hell starts on earth. Those people have chosen that life. Those people have chosen to react to good with hatred. Right? To react to something charitable with evil. Right? To react to good with evil. That's a choice. Those people choose hell. And there's many fathers that say you have to choose it. And if you choose it, and we all choose, right? There's no way it can be the way we imagine it, right? I mean, if you showed me like, a guy with a harp and wings and clouds and candy, okay, on one side, and then you say, or you can pick pitchfork, sulfur, burning, screams, right? And which do you pick? I don't think I'm going to pick the other one, right? So it must not be the way I conceive it, right? Which is very comforting. Because if it is the way I conceive it, if you can conceive a hell and heaven, then what have you done? You've just made some crap up, right? You've made an idol that you're a pagan, right? You've made an idol and you've made a god, and you've constructed him in a way that I get him, and this is what he does. I do the things on the left side, bad. I do things on the right side, good. I know how to handle this. Right? And so, the book of Revelation says, the books shall be opened, and all the fathers tell us that the books are hearts, right? And so, even the way we conceive of acts of love, and we say God rewards us for that love. How does he reward us for love? You guys are throwing things, really? How does he reward us for love? Is it like I did, I stopped and I helped a poor person, whatever. And God says, well, you stopped and helped a poor person. That's really great. I'm going to give you 7 points for that, right? Oh, and you stopped in a rainy day, 9 points. Or is it not that at all? Or is it the fact that I stopped? It's not the stopping and helping. It's the heart that wanted to stop. And that heart is love. And you're already in heaven. And that's already the reward for that heart. See what I'm saying? So it's nothing to do with the action. In fact, there's someone I may not stop for. And all I do is think and pray about that person the rest of the drive. Does God say, well, that's only 4 points? You're not going to hit the full 7 on that one? We can talk more about it later, though. Good. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, concerns? Thank you for asking a question. All right. Glory be to God forever. Amen. You guys